The creation of pivot charts is virtually identical to the creation of traditional or standard charts. Once they display, we quickly realize that while there are some common features, there are also a lot of new options with which we are probably not quite as familiar. A combination of buttons and drop-downs are scattered across the screen. We need to understand how to utilize these to leverage what pivot charts can provide. Let's start by getting a little bit more comfortable before we get to the new stuff. After all, a lot about pivot charts is exactly the same as traditional Excel charts, including the parts of the chart. We still have axes and legends, we still have data markers and all of the other things that we're used to. We can also manipulate or modify those standard chart components in exactly the same way. Most often, that's going to be by right-clicking something specific on the chart itself or by using the ribbon options. In fact, the ribbon options for pivot chart tools are exactly the same as chart tools, at least as far as the Format tab and the Design tab go. What's different is because this is a pivot chart, it also has an Analyze tab, like a pivot table would. Here we notice a couple of things that I want to address right away. In addition to all of the things that we're used to seeing for the pivot table itself, on the far right-hand end, there is a Show Hide group. A couple of interesting things here. First of all, as we look at the chart, and yes, I know right now it's a little small. We'll make it larger in just a moment. But what we want to notice is that we have all of these different buttons that are scattered across the chart itself. These do not need to display. And one of the reasons we may not want to show them is because if we print the chart, these buttons will print as well. By using the Field Buttons option from the ribbon, we can turn all of them off, or all of them back on, or pick and choose which ones we want to see. Since we'll be working with many of these buttons, we'll go ahead and turn them all on. The other thing we notice is on the right-hand side of the screen, we have the Pivot Chart Fields list, just like in the pivot table itself. This field list can be toggled on and off, either by using its own Close button, or by toggling it from the Show Hide group as well. We'll go ahead and turn that off because we're not going to be specifically working with it, and this gives us a little bit more space on screen. Now, I do want to go all the way down to the bottom right corner of the screen and zoom in so that we can actually see some of the things that we're working with on the chart. This means we'll have to scroll a little bit, but I think it will make working with things easier. So, getting back to where we were, many of the things about a pivot chart are exactly the same as they are with a standard chart. There are a few things that are very different, though, about the functionality, and I want to review those for just a second. The main differences between a pivot chart and a standard chart include the fact that we can't switch row and column orientation in a pivot chart. We also can't use several of the chart types. Now, of course, all of the standard ones are still good. Line charts, column charts, and so forth. But we can't use the XY scatter, the stock, or the bubble chart types with a pivot chart. We also need to know that pivot charts are based off of the pivot cache, not directly off of the pivot table itself. That again is a little bit different, since standard charts are based directly off of a data source. If we change the layout of either the table or the chart, remember we're talking about pivot tables and pivot charts here, it's also going to change the other. So they are tied together and based off of the pivot cache, so any changes that are made to one will be reflected in the other immediately. Another difference is that we can't change the chart data range using the Select Data Source dialog box of a pivot chart. And lastly, we're certainly welcome and able to refresh a pivot chart just like we can refresh a pivot table. But there are some things that will change with a pivot chart. These things normally stay the same when we refresh data with a standard chart. But with a pivot chart, trend lines, data labels, error bars, and other changes to data sets are not going to be preserved with refresh. So with those things at least in the back of our mind, let's go ahead and get a little bit more familiar with how we manipulate the layout and the settings for an actual pivot chart. The easiest way to remember all of this is all of these buttons represent different areas of the underlying pivot table. Let's go ahead and scroll down to the bottom of the chart to see the easiest ones. Our pivot table uses row fields, including region and sales rep. Currently, we're showing all of the regions and all of the sales reps. Just like we can filter a pivot table, we also can filter the pivot chart. So let's say that right now we're acting as the sales manager and we do not want to see all of the regions. We're specifically interested in just the Eastern region. By turning off or filtering out North and Southwest and clicking OK, we just greatly simplified our chart. Likewise, we can say that we don't even want to see all of the sales reps for that particular region. Maybe we only want to see Beth and John. We don't want to see Mark. And we don't want to see Susan. All of a sudden, our chart is very different than it was just a couple of clicks ago, but it's showing the data that is most relevant. Like other types of filtering, it's very simple to put it back by simply choosing the Select All option and applying the filter for both of the fields. Another place we can look to make some major changes is on the right-hand side of the chart. Here we get to see yet another filter. This is telling us that we're currently looking at several different parameters and the values associated with them. Maybe now we're interested in only showing certain types of customers. Again, we have a drop-down that not only allows us to sort, but also to filter. Our question now is, please show us all of our government contracts. So we'll turn off Select All. That's the fastest way to remove all those check marks. And then we'll just turn on the one we want for government and say OK. We could also do this type of sorting and filtering if we had the field list available. But again, we turned that off to make a little bit more space for us to actually see the chart. The field list does offer us exactly the same options as it would on the pivot table list itself. In that, we can drag and drop and rearrange and choose different types of calculations. In these ways, it's easy to see that pivot charts are not exactly like standard charts, nor are they exactly like pivot tables. But they're alike enough between the two that they should be vaguely familiar. Those features that they share are used in the same way. Unique features allow us to manipulate the pivot chart to display exactly the information that we want in a useful way. While pivot tables do a great job of simplifying and summarizing data, the pivot chart provides the visual representation that is more effective in communicating information in a memorable way, especially to others.